Welcome to this reading and conversation with Sabrina Imbler. I'm Heather Wells Peterson. I'm a PhD student in creative writing at UNLV and a BMI PhD fellow. Thank you. BMI wants to thank its supporters, Beverly Rogers, Miriam Shearing, and the Rogers Foundation. And this project is also supported in part by the Nevada Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, the UNLV Asian and Asian American Studies program, the UNLV Department of Interdisciplinary Gender and Ethnic Studies, and the Neon Pacific Initiative. So if you all could please take a moment right now to silence your cell phones if you haven't already. There are, as always, more wonderful BMI events coming up that I want to make sure you're aware of, especially a virtual event on the possibilities of satire tomorrow at 12 p.m. featuring Tony Tulatimity and Sarah Papalardo and hosted by MFA fellow Destiny Pinder-Buckley. And there's also a writing and activism symposium on April 5th with Shearing fellow Alejandra Heredia. Free registration and full details available at blackmountaininstitute.org. I recommend checking both of those events out, and if you aren't already following BMI on Instagram, you probably should, because that's the best way, at least that's how I keep track of everything that's happening, because there's always something great happening every week, pretty much. So I'm going to introduce Sabrina shortly, and then after the reading and our conversation, they'll take a few questions from the audience. And then Sabrina's books will be for sale at the table that you walked past on the way in here. And they'll also be available to sign those books. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas wishes to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities of this region and recognize that the university is situated on the traditional homelands of the Nuwu Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. We encourage everyone in this space to engage in continued learning about the indigenous peoples who work and live on this land since time immemorial, including the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Moapa Band of Paiutes. When I was adding that land acknowledgement to my introduction, I was thinking about how I was especially struck by it because I think, sometimes it's something that you hear so much that you stop hearing it. And I was at Sabrina's craft talk earlier today, and it focused on writing as symbiosis and how we might look at evolutionary relationships to more ethically write about other lives, especially the non-human. But it was also not just non-human communities, but communities that we don't belong to or aren't a part of. How can we ethically write about that? And so I think a land acknowledgement is kind of a brief moment of that kind of care that we were talking about, to pause and recognize and hopefully think about what we can do in response to what we're remembering and acknowledging. I also, when I was reading Sabrina's professional bio, was struck again by this sense of kind of prioritizing mutual care. So I'm going to read that bio to you. Sabrina Imbler is a staff writer at Defector, a worker-owned site where they cover creatures and the natural world. Their first full-length book, How Far the Light Reaches, won a Los Angeles Times Book Prize in Science and Technology. Their chapbook, Dyke, Geology, was selected for the National Book Foundation Science and Literature Program, and they now live in Brooklyn with their partner, cats Melon and Sesame, and a school of fish. So reading that, you might notice Sabrina's focus on community and mutual responsibility and care, what we owe other people, our environments, our work, the creatures we encounter directly and indirectly, and those we don't encounter at all. In the craft talk, they discuss these themes further in the context of work and writing, describing two dilemmas they faced at different points in their professional and writing life and how they navigated it. They acknowledged how difficult it can be to focus on mutual care and responsibility in the face not only of professional ambition, but economic necessity and general survival. Still, they urged us to ask ourselves hard questions. What are our values as writers? What do we owe our readers? What do we owe ourselves? What professional lines will we not cross, and what will we do if those lines become blurred? In answering those questions, each of us began to construct a moral framework in the hopes of avoiding making decisions individually and on the fly when we might be confused, exhausted, or scared, having sort of a moral lodestar to turn to. Sabrina also talked about the ethics of writing about others, members of communities we don't belong to. What do we owe those we write about, including creatures? They describe the evolution of their answer to this question first as an exercise of empathy, imagining what it's like to be someone or something unlike yourself. But as they considered their relationship to animals, they began to look at it as one of mutual exchange. And the answer expanded to include what they could actually give the creatures they write about, what actions they could take, what actions they could inspire others to take. This careful, considered approach is evident in Sabrina's book, which is a work of memoir, but also a work of discovery, research, and radical empathy. Rereading the book to prepare for this event, I was especially moved by what it means to write about creatures so different from human beings, creatures many people rarely or never encounter, creatures most human beings have never seen. In a way, writing about sea creatures can get at the heart of aspects of being alive, even being human, that writing about humans or animals we more readily respond to because we live with them more intimately or find them more charismatic cannot. The estrangement we feel from these creatures can, in the right hands, be productive. The plight of goldfish in two small bowls can help us understand the concept of indeterminate growth, the freedom that can be found in shedding the constrictions of gender, sexuality, what we expect of others' bodies, and our own. Sand strikers, enormous worms that lurk out of sight, waiting to strike their prey, provide a way of reprising the story of Lorena Bobbitt, which those of you who remember the 90s will remember, as well as reappraising our own lives, the stories we've told ourselves, who we were told to think of as predators, how we think about prey, and who might be predators without our recognizing them. A whale drawing class becomes a metaphor for the process of analyzing a failed relationship and the process of writing about oneself and others. These essays braid together Sabrina's experience and the lives of sea creatures to generate something new. They urge us to find love and creativity in difference, to embrace the generative power of estrangement, to see the invisible, to research the unknown or poorly understood, to speculate empathetically in order to communicate with care. Near the end of the craft talk, Sabrina spoke of the three kinds of symbiosis: mutualism, when two organisms live close together to mutual benefit; commensalism, when one organism benefits and the other is unharmed; and parasitism, when one organism benefits but the other is harmed. Sabrina urged us in our writing, our work, and our lives to strive for mutualism through consideration, responsibility, and care. This book urges this too, through its gentle yet exacting focus, its emotional honesty, its generosity of spirit, and the care in its attention and language, sense of discovery and delight, and dedication to expanding the reader's world to include communities that have been overlooked or marginalized, as well as creatures the sunlight will never touch. That's more than enough for me. Now please help me in welcoming Sabrina Imbler.
Thank you so much, Heather, for that introduction. Oh. Okay. Can everyone hear me in the back okay? Yeah? Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for coming out today to this marvelous room. I've never been giving a talk in any place like this, and I'm kind of obsessed how these two fellows are like actively charging me as I'm speaking. And that's never happened before. Amazing. So I'm just going to read two pieces today, portions of two pieces. One is from the book, and one is a new piece of work, and I'm just timing myself so I don't go over. But the first piece I wanted to read is called Us Everlasting, and it's the final essay in How Far the Light Reaches. In the ravenous ocean, very few immortal jellyfish live up to their name. They could, in theory, go on forever without dying, but most do not. They do not feel pain the same way we do, may not, even as they are being torn apart, comprehend what pain is, but they can be damaged, and often are. They can age, can succumb to infection, or be stabbed into a pulp with tweezers, can be whisked into the bladed fan of a nuclear power plant. They can be swallowed whole. What does immortality mean when you can still be eaten by anything with a mouth? Most immortal jellyfish die in this thoroughly regular way, fortunate enough not to glitch into disease or senescence, unfortunate enough to disintegrate in stomach acid. The jellyfish resembles a ghostly tassel, translucent dome topping tentacled fringe. It is tiny, approximately the size of a pea, and when it floats in water, its glassy body winks in and out of visibility as if able to dip parts of itself into other dimensions. It only has color in its gonads, 4 rusty dots suspended in the goo of its umbrella. The jellyfish usually has 16 tentacles or fewer, each swelled at the tip like sticky hands. It has no brain, no heart, no eyes. It has only one hole, a mouth cum anus, which eats and excretes and squirts water to propel its bell-shaped body. The immortal jellyfish starts out life just like any other jellyfish, a fertilized egg morphing into a pellet-shaped larva that settles on the seafloor and unfurls into a branching stalk called a polyp. Like a fruit tree, the polyp's arms effloresce in buds that shed tiny medusas, the final form of a jellyfish. Within a month, the small medusas balloon into a crowd of adults. Here on out, other jellyfish might mature, lay their eggs, or spew their sperm, and slowly trickle into death. But when the immortal jellyfish's body begins to fail, it ages backwards. Its ailing body sinks to the seafloor or some hard surface and rearranges itself into a silky lump, looking like an egg or a cell, primordial, all potential. It seals itself in an envelope of chitin and shuffles around the meanings of its cells. And then it sprouts into a polyp and grows, not into one individual jellyfish, but many clones. So the single damaged jellyfish becomes a host of younger possible selves, each with the same power to regenerate. As far as we know, the jellyfish can do this over and over and over, as many times as they are damaged, into something like eternity. The scientists who originally described the peculiar regeneration did not choose to call the creature, also known as Turritopsis, immortal. One scientist went so far as to write that he would never have used that word. Originally, he said that the jellyfish was capable of ontogeny reversal, meaning reversing the direction of the ordinary life cycle, but ontogeny reversal jellyfish does not make headlines nor earn grant funding, and so the creature became immortal. The jellyfish does not know it is immortal, nor would it long for such a thing if it were not. Jellyfish do not long for anything. They never feel out of place because they do not feel. Some scientists say this biological simplicity may explain the jellyfish's immortality, a kind of evolutionary trade-off. When I read this, I understand. If something intelligent were ever given a second chance at life, it may never want to grow up. Like millions of other mortal beings, when I learned about the immortal jellyfish, I envied the animal. It wasn't the immortality itself that I coveted, but its mechanism. Our traditional notions of immortality are so languorous and passive. Jessie Tuck, the everlasting teen, sips from a magic spring and stays 17 for eternity, just like Edward Cullen. I grew up thinking of immortality as something won with a drink or a bite or a pill, a static and irreversible state of being. But the immortal jellyfish has no notion of these tepid forevers. Its immortality is active. It is constantly aging in both directions, always reinventing itself, bell shrinking and expanding, tentacles retreating into flesh and wriggling out again. It is not living forever, but reliving forever. When the immortal jellyfish ages in reverse, its body is not choosing eternity, but rejecting death, which seem to me entirely different things. And the life it chooses is not young adulthood, forever a gangly 17, but childhood. It grows up again. It's an old trope now that many queer and trans people have a second adolescence. The first happens alongside everyone else's, except you are not yourself. You feel as if you are the only person you can talk to. You live someone else's truth. Or maybe you don't know how to be a queer child, never even considered it for one or every reason, and things don't make sense until one day you turn 20 and have what some call a breakthrough, and the clips from your childhood roll back in a suddenly sense-making montage. Watching Leonardo DiCaprio gradually freeze to death on loop and wondering if he was the only man you would ever want to kiss. Sleeping next to a 3-foot-tall poster of Shania Twain. Dreaming of girls in your class and waking up in a fog of confusion or shame. Now comes your second childhood, second adolescence. Maybe you cut off your hair, maybe you wear chokers. Maybe you fall in queer love for the first time, which feels symphonic when it starts, world-ending when it's over. This second adolescence is bittersweet, full of highs and also plagued by the nagging reminder that all this could have been yours the first time around. So what if you could do it over? And then again? What body would you choose? Who would you be? Who would you love? And who would you long for? Would you do it over and over and over again? Thank you. Okay, the second piece I'm going to read is new work. It just came out in the spring edition of Orion, which is a very fun issue that is it's called Queer Planet, and it's all queer contributors. And this essay was called Key Changes in Orion. The first sound in the universe is joylessly underwhelming. White noise boring through the taffy stretch of nascent space. The Big Bang is not a bang, but a droning robotic purr, galaxies expanding from the hot throat of a cat. Things cool, atoms whirl into being, then light, scattering in the cosmic fog. Gas clumps to form the first stars, whose huddled masses in turn form the first galaxies. A storm of gas and dust collapses, perhaps T-boned by a nearby supernova, skidding and spinning into a sun. Our sun. All of this cacophony, the vibrational screech, the sonic boom, would be brutal for anyone around to hear it. But there is no one, not yet. Life remains entirely uninvented. And when it finally appears, likely around 700 million years later, ears remain entirely uninvented. So no one hears the torrent of the first oceans, the slick of the first big freeze, the jostling of the continents. Life pleats, becomes multicellular. Sponges drink in the ocean, fungi unfurl, a worm slithers in the murk. Eventually, the first plants extrude from land and insects swarm. As seedlings swell skyward and scrub thunders into forests, insects sprout wings and join them. This living does not happen silently. Bodies scraping through brush, whirrings of wings, exoskeletons crunched by jaws, but these noises are unintentional. They are not meant for anyone. This changes 270 million years ago, when an insect akin to a cricket scrapes one ornamented wing over another, veins stiffened like corduroy, creating a rasp. The rasp does not sound like a song or even like a note. You might mistake it for one rock scuffing against another. But however tuneless, the rasp of Permastridulus brongniarti, not said that out loud yet, became the first known earthly voice, writes biologist David George Haskell. There is no single agreed-upon definition of animal song. Some biologists reserve the label for the steepled melodies of birds and tapestries of whale song. Others apply it more generously to any creature that calls out again and again towards others of its kind. Permastridulus' coarse guttural call lacked the complex structure of modern cricket songs, but it used the same mechanism. So you might agree that that moment, hundreds of millions of years ago, when a rasp crackled out of two wings and bellowed out the insect's presence for some unknown reason, escaping a predator, threatening a foe, finding a mate, marked Permastridulus as the planet's first singer. The fossil record is far from exhaustive. Earth's first singer was probably not Permastridulus itself, but a relative that evaded fossilization. Whoever they were and however they looked, they were the first to halo the earth with the voice of their bodies, a chorus of tremulous wings. All of us who sing our own songs, some just as raspy and tuneless, unknowingly follow in this ancient lineage. We too feel compelled beyond reason to call out into the night and announce our presence to whomever might be listening. We too want to make ourselves known. We too want to be found. The fact that I have never been a skilled singer has never kept me from karaoke. In adolescence, I was a part-time theater kid, a past that left me with a simmering, unquenched desire for some kind of spotlight. I began singing in earnest after college, in matchbox rooms with friends, coworkers, and strangers in bars where we all thrummed against each other, trading dollars for a song. We huddled around the screen, a pixelated yellow square containing Sunfly, our bespectacled insectoid mascot whose face is all mouth, a creature created for karaoke. My voice is loud and clear, but also flat and often tone deaf. I could never command a room as well as an actually talented singer, a fact I was reminded of whenever I karaoke'd with certain friends. When they sang, rooms fell silent. I envied this attention, how it felt alchemic, sublimating into self-worth. I, too, wanted to conjure delight and affection. In this way, I suppose I am no different from any other creature. The evolutionary basis of any animal song is a bid for a mate. Karaoke is famously an outlet for rage. The rare public place screaming will be met with applause. But in my experience, the night always ends with love songs, a thinning and bleary crowd, some too many drinks deep, listening to a ballad of the unrequited. In my 20s, my favorite karaoke ballad was Hinder's Lips of an Angel, a grungy confession sung by a man to his ex-girlfriend over a whispered phone call. Whispered because his new girl's in the next room. Lips of an Angel is so wretchedly self-serious in its generic valorization of cheating that it is transmuted almost endearingly into camp. I listened to the song in middle school on some torrented copy of Now That's What I Call Music. I was not necessarily drawn to the lyrics, can't cheat on your girlfriend if you don't have one, but rather its naked emotional core. It was a song about yearning, which was then my favorite pastime. I yearned for everything, a crush, adulthood, a body and self I could love more. My friends and I loved to karaoke to the pop divas we grew up blasting from our boomboxes. But the first time I heard one of them sing Lips of an Angel, a song I had not consciously listened to in a decade, I felt a swell of my old adolescent kinship. I started my own surreptitious relationship with it, singing it in rooms and bars full of strangers until it felt as inextricable from my identity as my haircut, my go-to karaoke song. I grew to relish the way some people, often men, reacted to my performance, nodding along to the melancholic opening chords before surprise plastered their face when they saw who held the mic. At the risk of being reductive, Lips of an Angel is a boy song, not a girl song. When I began to sing, my face soft and eyebrows painted on, I felt a certain frisson, as if for just this moment I was stepping into another body. As an alto, close to a contralto, I had always felt more comfortable singing songs written for men. I wonder now if my singing voice was the first plane on which I could have claimed to have passed, even briefly, as something other than a woman. Each time I sang Lips, I practiced embodying this man, this self-defeating aspirational cheater, too afraid to leave a relationship that rendered him dispassionate. During the chorus, I gripped the sweaty neck of my beer and held it up like a candle. During the guitar solo, I thrashed my head. I spat gravel from my throat and sang, not to the back of the room, but beyond it. The morning after, I'd wake up without a voice. We never learn if the singer ever gains the courage to go back to his ex, but it seems unlikely that he moves beyond his comfortable stasis. The song ends with the same line that opens it. Honey, why you calling me so late? As a middle schooler, I never questioned the idea that his ex's call came too late for him to act on. I was obsessed with the idea that my life had already foreclosed certain possibilities, such as becoming a figure skater or speaking Mandarin. Only when I got older would I learn that it is never really too late for anything. Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
I hope everyone's enjoying the animal sounds. I was told they were lowered, the levels were lowered for this, but I appreciate that they're still there as a backdrop.
There was a moment when you were talking about bugs, and it was bug sounds, and it was like kind of trippy. So thank you for that reading. it was fun to hear the new essay.
Thank you.
If I could, I would trade almost anything to be a good singer.
Whose voice would you want?
I think I would want like an Adele vibe.
Yeah.
Like deep and moving and powerful. My voice is not deep. I wonder if there's something about writing and singing that's similar, or like singing other people's songs, because I feel like a lot of writers either are singers or want to be good singers.
That's so interesting. I mean, I think about like at the Tin House Workshop in the summer, they have like a famous karaoke night, and you get to see like the most celebrated novelists in the world, like singing like Blink 182, which is very moving. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I think about not necessarily singing per se, but karaoke, right? It's like a form of covering something else. And I feel like when I was first trying to figure out my voice as a writer, I was constantly like doing covers of like bluettes, like maybe I'll be like Maggie Nelson, or like maybe I'll be, like, no, I really just wanted to be like Maggie Nelson. But I don't know, I feel like there's a lot you can learn about your voice from, generously, like, I guess, using someone else's form, or using their work as a jumping off point for your own.
Yeah, and I think there's a kind of ventriloquism that has to happen sometimes with writing that's similar to karaoke, like you're being someone else but also yourself, which I think segues well into my next question, which is kind of, this collection. Do you think of it as a collection of essays, or kind of more of a whole memoir?
Such a great question. When I sold How Far the Light Reaches, I was like, it's essays. And something that you can do when you're selling a book is you can read your passes, which means you read the rejections that editors have sent you. And I was like, I can handle it. Readers, I don't know if I handled it. But one of the rejections was like, these aren't essays, these are articles. And I was like, because I don't know, I think I felt like essays were serious. I don't really know what an article means, like compared to an essay. And I think I was really nervous about the idea of writing a memoir, because at the time I was relatively young and nothing had really happened to me, which you might understand if you've read the book. But I think I felt like I didn't have a right to tell my own story, and so I really wanted it to be essays. But now that it's been out for a couple of years, I'm like, it's a memoir. In essays, if you want to call it that, but it's a memoir.
That's kind of how I experienced it, I think. So when you were writing the memoir and essays, and we talked about this in the craft doc, but what your answer was so interesting that I wanted you to talk about it some more. But it seems like you kind of started with this idea of sea creatures as like an organizing principle. How did you go in one direction, starting with yourself and finding sea creatures? Did you start with the sea creatures and find things in yourself, a mixture, something else?
Yeah, so the first creature that really sparked the book is a deep-sea octopus of the species Granuletini boreopacifica, otherwise known as the brooding octopus, if you want to talk about her and not use her Latin name. But scientists discovered a female individual of this octopus brooding her eggs in the deep sea for more than 4.5 years. And something that you should know about octopus sex is once a female and a male octopus mate, the male goes off, dies, rip to him. The female goes and lays her eggs, and then for the next months or maybe a year, she just sits over them and she broods them. So she'll oxygenate them with her tentacles, she'll guard them from predators, but during this time, she stops eating. And once the eggs hatch, the female dies. So as soon as she lays her eggs, that's basically the end of her life. And I learned about this octopus that brooded her eggs for 4.5 years. That was unbelievable to me. And when I learned about her, I didn't really have a real job writing about science. There was no way that I could write about her story in a meaningful way. And so I just kept thinking about her. And I think after a year, I realized that her story was reminding me of my relationship with my mother and the sacrifices that my mother made to, come to America and immigrate and have me. And I thought about my history of disordered eating and the times when I wanted to starve myself and my mother's relationship with disordered eating. And I realized that maybe this, the story of the octopus and my own story belong together, because I don't think I would have made those connections if I hadn't seen the octopus first. And so once I had that model, as I explained in the craft talk, I made a very scientific T-chart, where on one side I just put sea creatures, and on the other side I put different life experiences or cultural things that I wanted to talk about. And I kind of felt stupid doing it. I was like, this isn't how people come up with books. But I think just by having these things side by side that I wouldn't normally think to pair really got a lot of connections going in my mind. And so then I tried to really just go with my gut and say, this deep sea crab with very hairy arms, which to me, looks almost like a feather boa, like how hairy its claws are. And then, this personal experience of finding queer nightlife in a time when I felt really alone, I was like, feather boas are gay. let's start off with that. I think my only in, I was like, this creature looks queer, and in the 18th century version of that word. But as I started to actually learn more about this crab, which lives by hydrothermal vents in the deep sea, which are these gaps of in the ocean floor where geothermally heated water rushes out. So these oases of heat where the crabs just pile on top of each other. In the pitch black of the deep sea, I was like, oh, the crabs are raving, just like me. Let's keep going with this. And so I think there were often moments where I realized, by trusting my gut, I found all of these connections. But also the T-chart, as I mentioned in the craft, as I mentioned in the class, the T-chart also resulted in essays that did not make it into the book because they were bad.
And one of them was about Guy Fieri and a sea slug.
Yes. So when I was first starting out as a science journalist, I was working at Audubon magazine, and I was making $10 an hour in New York City. And crucially, I wanted to go clubbing, so that was not enough money for that. So I got a second job writing clickbait about the ocean, and I wrote these 350-word aggregative content stories that were like, you'll never guess what a dolphin vagina looks like, or this handicapped goldfish got a new lease on life. And I wrote one of these silly little stories about a sea slug that was yellow, but it had these little almost spine-like protrusions on its back that had white tips. And I was like, this sea slug has frosted tips. So does Guy Fieri. And something else you should know is when you're pitching a nonfiction book, you don't need to write the whole thing. You can sell it on proposal. And so I was just making up essays. I was like, in this essay, I will talk about Guy Fieri looking like this sea slug and how we as a nation made fun of him, but he turned out to be a really decent guy. He, as we were talking about, he does a lot of mutual aid, he has a lesbian daughter and he's supportive of her. You wouldn't expect that necessarily from a guy with tips that frosted. And so that was the essay that I pitched, and then I tried to write it, and I realized it was not an essay, maybe just a vibe, but I think fondly of it.
Yeah, I'm a big Guy Fieri fan. There's a place in my heart, a special place in my heart for him. If you haven't watched Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, I highly recommend it. It's very soothing. Just giant plates of food and so much joy and excitement about it. So I was wondering how did you so it sounds like part of this was sort of a piling up and then a culling process for the animals. But I was wondering if you had some kind of ethos or approach for choosing the animals. Did you think about what animals were viral? The octopus was kind of viral, right? Reuters called it Mother of the Year. And kind of what animals get our attention and focus like that, and then maybe balancing it with animals that didn't? Or what was your kind of approach to deciding which animals got in and how to choose that?
That's such a good idea to have a plan going into a book. I mean, a lot of the sea creatures that I knew about, like, were viral ones. Like the brooding octopus went viral. The deep sea yeti crab. I don't know if anyone has seen this meme. Many people in there might be too young for it, but it's like a hairy white crab in sort of like a dark space of the ocean, and it's like this creature has adapted to the crushing pressure and oppressive darkness. Yes. So I saw that meme on Facebook in the fall of 2016, right after Trump had been elected for the first time, and I was like, I am that crab. Like, I can relate to that crab. And so I think a lot of the creatures, I guess, cultural presence was just like, that's how I learned about them. But something that was really important to me, I guess in my work as a science journalist, I find it really important to write about creatures that are not what we would consider charismatic megafauna. So none of the creatures in this room, these are all charismatic megafauna. But, you know, something that people might look at and say, yuck. I was like, I want to feature some of those guys. So I didn't, I guess, intentionally like look out for those creatures, but I think I always had a fondness for them. And I found that something that felt really exciting to me was to tell my story not alongside animals that have a very traditional life and death arc that we do. You know, we're born as an individual, we get old and we die as an individual, but there's a creature in my book called a salp, which has a very unique way of life where it switches between asexual and sexual life stages, where in one stage of its life, it's like this giant like chain of clones, and each clone kind of looks like a little, I don't know, they look like the little figures in Life in the board game where you put them into your car. It's like that, but made of jelly. And it's just like this long chain of clones where each clone is an individual salp, but all together the chain is also one individual salp. So like a salp is an individual and a community. And then it also has this asexual stage where it's just like a barrel growing its chain of clones inside of its chest. And then the chain of clones like bursts free and then gets big. And so I was really excited to think, like, how can I make these connections between my life and the life of something that is so unrecognizable, like a salp?
Yeah, I think, you know, a brooding octopus, we can kind of maybe more immediately empathize with it. These guys seem like they'd be fun at a party, I guess. But
I would be scared.
I mean, this bear, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe not after a few drinks, but I think it's interesting. I was thinking a lot when I was rereading the book about your approach to humanizing animals, when you choose to do it and when you choose to kind of speculate about their experience, and when you kind of push back against the idea of being able to tell what they were experiencing. And you, like, there's a line about the octopus, maybe the purple octopus in her youth passed by paling octopuses clinging to the edges of the canyon and recognized this would also be her fate one day. So I was wondering kind of how you decided when to sort of do that sort of active imagination and sort of a more humanizing approach, and when, like, the essay you read where you're like, this creature does not think like us, it does not feel like us, you know?
Yeah, no, that's such a good question, and thank you for pulling out that line, because it's like, I still want to know. I still want to know if she experienced that. So I guess, yeah, the practice of what I was doing is often called anthropomorphizing, where you attribute characteristics that we would consider human to a non-human animal or an object. And the moments I do it in the book, I think, are largely around octopus, whale. I think those are the moments where I really do anthropomorphize, and I think it was important to me to, I guess there's another term that I want to talk about that is called anthropodenialism, which is a horrible word, but it was coined by the primatologist Franz de Waal, who basically was making this case of, like, we're more likely to anthropomorphize animals that are like us in one way, that are social, that are intelligent, that are mammals, that have faces, which can be dangerous. You don't want to project too much of yourself onto an animal when that's not their experience. But to deny an animal the characteristics that we consider to be uniquely human can also be really dangerous, right? Because having a culture isn't something that is uniquely human, right? Elephants have culture, whales have culture. And so I think for those animals where they are similar to us in many ways, where they are social, they are intelligent in the ways that we consider ourselves to be intelligent, I gave myself more permission to make those connections and to try to, not even make them seem more human, but just make them more relatable, because we do have all of these things in common.
All right, so we can turn now to, or one more question for me? Okay. That actually, I have so many questions, but I wanted to ask you about metaphors and similes especially, because I think they serve so many different purposes in this memoir and essays. And first of all, there's just like a lot of fruits. Goldfish are the size of a pineapple. Octopuses are the reddish purple of plums. An octopus is the size of a personal pizza. So there's also some food. In general, casserole dishes, apples, wine-colored squid, a whale penis upright and desiccated and looking like a parsnip.
It did.
But then, I feel like there's, you especially need similes and metaphors when you're writing about animals that people might not be able to picture, or they might, like the Chinese sturgeon, have been around for so long that it's hard for us to even conceive of that amount of time. Whales that are so big that it's hard for us to conceive of that size. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your approach to metaphor and simile, as far as kind of both thematically, but also as a way to sort of make certain things comprehensible.
Definitely. I mean, to address the fruit and the food, my day job is a science journalist, and I write about animals, and I think the thing that I always want readers to leave my stories with is like a sense of knowing that animal, of having a sense of like, oh, like that's kind of what this little guy's all about. And I think a big part of that is size. Like, it's so hard to conceptualize the size of animals, especially if we just see a picture. Like the anglerfish that emerged from the deep sea that many of us have probably seen go viral, like it looks enormous, like it looks really scary, but it's like, I think it's like the size of your thumb, like it's so small. And so I think that also really helps us, possibly work through some of our fear or like disgust around certain animals, to say like, oh, it kind of looks scary, but it's actually, it could sit in my palm, like it could sit on my shoulder. So I think the food comparison, because also all science journalists, they do these size comparisons, but a lot of them will be like, oh, this gecko is the size of a $1 bill, like this frog is the size of a credit card. And it's like, get that capitalism out of my book. I will use food and fruits, because I love fruits. And I actually have a big Excel doc where as soon as I use a new size comparison, I'll put that in my Excel doc. So if it's scientists like, this frog is 8 centimeters, I'm like, okay, going through my Excel doc. Yeah, it's surprising how many animals are the size of a stroopwafel. But yeah, I guess, I think I just see metaphor and simile as a way to help people feel like they're really meeting the animal. Because many of the animals that I'm writing about, they live in the deep sea, they live in the ocean. We're never going to encounter them unless they are dying or we are dead, we can't really go to the deep sea. So it's my job to help bring them to life as much as I can on the page.